Have you ever noticed how easily we get caught up in who we think we are? We build this story about ourselves, what we're good at, what we're not, what we deserve, what we'll never achieve. And while that story can help us feel consistent, it can also trap us. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the third pivot in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is taking this conceptualized self and pivoting towards the self as context. So this pivot invites us to move from who we think we are, our conceptualized self, to something deeper, something more stable. The self as context. So let's jump into it. So let's start where most of us live in our day-to-day life, in our story, right? We have this ongoing mental narrative that tells us who we are and what we can expect from life. It's like the voice inside your head, right? Your little dictator that says, "Oh man, I'm not confident enough," or "I'm the kind of person who always overthinks things," or even "I'm too damaged to change." And the unfortunate part about the self, or really the conceptualized self, is sometimes that story gets written so early through pain, trauma, or repeated criticism that we stop questioning it, right? That becomes our story. That becomes who we are. It becomes automatic. I recently worked with a client, let's call him Bob, who came to therapy saying, "I just want to stop being the screw up in my family." He'd grown up hearing that message over and over again, and now as an adult, he couldn't see himself any other way. Every mistake, every missed opportunity, every moment of doubt, it all became evidence that his story was true. That was who he was. So that's what ends up being the trap of the conceptualized self. We don't just tell the story, we become it. You seeing how that can be a little dangerous there? So what does acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, offer instead? The third pivot, so this pivot we're talking about now, invites us to access what's called our self as context, or what I like to call the observer or the observing self. So think of your life as a movie. Every thought, memory, and emotion is like a scene playing out on a big old screen. Most of us get so caught up in this movie that we forget that we're actually sitting in the theater watching it unfold. We think we're in the movie, right? We think we are the character. We are in it. We're the actor, and people are watching us. Self as context is that awareness, that part of you that notices the movie but isn't defined by it. Have you ever been just so ticked off, angry, and you think to yourself, "Oh, what the heck? Like, why am I so angry right now? This is weird. I look like an idiot," right? That part of you that is observing those emotions is the self as context. That is you observing what's happening. There's this old saying. I don't know if I've talked about it before on the channel or on the show, but it's the analogy of the whole lake. Okay, picture this big old lake. It's super deep, and a storm comes over this lake. Okay, and so as it's raining and thundering, lightning, all these things, the top of the lake is all like rippling with water, some waves are going up and down, it's all crazy. Whereas the bottom of the lake is calm. It doesn't matter how strong the wind is or if a giant tree falls in the lake, the bottom of the lake is always going to be calm. So the bottom of the lake is this observing self, or the self as context. And too many of us live on top of this lake. We let the wind, the tiny little ripples, the tiny small rocks dictate what we do on a day-to-day basis, or dictate our emotions, our feelings, and just overall behavior. You know, the tiny small rocks reminds me of that scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. What else floats on water? Tiny small rocks. See? So even those small rocks that are floating on top of the lake, yeah, that doesn't affect your self as context. It doesn't affect this observing self that you have. Stephen Hayes, the founder of acceptance and commitment therapy, puts it beautifully. He says, "You are not the content of your thoughts. You are the space in which those thoughts appear." So that's the pivot from the I am story to the I am the one noticing my story. You are not your story. You are simply one experiencing it. So this isn't just a spiritual or philosophical idea. It's actually supported by quite a bit of research, believe it or not. Studies are showing that cultivating the self as context, or the observing self, is associated with things like lower anxiety, reduced depressive symptoms, and greater resilience. When we step back and see our experiences from this observer perspective, the emotional intensity doesn't necessarily disappear, but our relationship to it changes. So this doesn't mean that if you're always accessing your observing self, right, this higher self at the bottom of this lake that's never disturbed, that doesn't mean that your life is always going to be zen and peace. Everything that's happening on top of this lake, right, is still happening, and you're still going to experience that. But when you are able to step back and view yourself as from this self as context, the day-to-day waves, all the hustle and bustle won't be the things that run your life. You will be able to run your life. When accessing your higher self, the higher self is, did I say that's a, that's what I also call this observer self, okay, is also the higher self. But when you are able to view yourself from this self as context, we become less reactive, less judgmental, and more capable of making choices based on our overall values instead of our fear. Here's going to be a fun little exercise for you to do. This is one I really like. So imagine your thoughts are these little leaves floating down this river, and each leaf represents a memory, a judgment, a belief, some beautiful, some painful, okay? But most of us spend our lives in the river, grabbing at the leaves, wrestling with them, trying to hold on to them, trying to hold on to the ones we like and get rid of the ones we don't like. But in self as context, we step onto the riverbank and we watch the leaves float by. We notice the current. We realize, oh, okay, I am not the leaves. I'm not even the river. I'm the one just watching it all flow. And from that place, the riverbank, we gain the ability to choose how we respond rather than being swept away by the current. So just like the lake analogy, you now have this little river analogy with leaves. These thoughts, beliefs, and judgments are still going to be going down this river, but you get to decide how you react to those rather than trying to be in the river wrestling. So when you begin to live from this place, from the self as context, something beautiful happens. You stop fighting your internal experience and you start holding it gently. You realize that pain doesn't mean brokenness. It means you're human. You're normal. Congratulations. Another quote from Stephen Hayes. He said, "You are the sky. Everything else is just the weather." And that's really the essence of this third pivot. It's not about escaping your story. It's about holding it with compassion and spaciousness, right? You're the sky. You are not endless, but you're pretty darn big, all right? Because the sky doesn't get smaller when the storm passes through it. It remains wide, steady, and infinite. So listen, the next time your mind tells you who you are, too much, not enough, unworthy, unfixable, take a deep breath, step back, and remember, you are not your story. You are the space where healing happens. So as you go throughout the week, practice noticing the difference between what's happening and the one noticing what's happening. Because it's there. It's always there. And you can always access it at any time. See if you can step out of the river onto the bank or access the bottom of this lake that is always calm, always peaceful. Or see if you can become the sky, even just for a few breaths. This isn't just going to be a constant state of being that you're going to live in for the rest of your life once you master this. It's going to be something that you can easily jump into, but you don't have to always, and you won't always. I think it's unrealistic to say you're always going to be in that state, but you can more easily access it the more you practice and the more you, that's why we have things like mindfulness, right? In the first place, because we practice getting to those points. We take a step back, access this observing self, and just watch our thoughts, these judgments, these beliefs come through, and just watch it flow. That's really what mindfulness is at the end of the day. That is the, what's his face from Walter Mitty? That's the quintessence. So, throughout this week, try and practice some of that mindfulness. Take a step back, view or access that observing self, and realize that you're not all of these crappy things that this dictator within tries to tell you. And in fact, you're not even the good things, because you are not, for example, happiness. You are one experiencing it. All right, thanks for listening. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about the fourth pivot, which is presence, or grounding yourself, which is going to be pretty darn cool. I will say too, just like the previous two episodes, in the bottom of in the description here, let's see, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Yeah, it's all description, right? I don't have to say any other. So down below in the description, there is going to be a little handout for different exercises you can try to practice this self as context, including this the river exercise, the sky exercise, and the lake exercise with a few bonuses. So click it. It's just a Word document, totally for free. Go ahead and check it out, download it, and keep it handy when you want to practice some self as context. The third pivot, baby. So join me next week for the fourth pivot. Until then, continue to stay committed to who you want to become. Keep noticing, keep expanding, and keep choosing awareness over autopilot. Live with intention. You are not your thoughts. You're the space that holds them. See you next week.